The second question is, what happens when a parent gives up fighting when the child is engaging in these problematic behaviors for more than 20 minutes, And the problem behaviors include things like screaming, banging their head, and hitting themselves on the head. So the short answer is you don't give up. The thing is, if you think the screaming and the bang on the head and hitting themselves on the head is bad today, it's going to be worse next year. And it's going to be even worse the year after as they get bigger, stronger, faster. These protests are not going to subside. They're going to get worse and more challenging to tackle every year that passes because you're getting older and they're getting stronger and faster. The thing is, I'm making assumptions here too. I'm assuming that it's a relatively smaller child, it's not a teenager and it's not like a 25-year-old, we're dealing still with kids between 0 and 10 years old, still somewhat manageable in terms of the things that they're doing. To get rid of the behavior, you would do the exact same thing. It's just more painful and more difficult to dislodge these behaviors that the older they grow. Why? Because they have a longer and longer history of succeeding with these. And the longer of a history that you have to deal with, the tougher it is to change those behaviors. It's not impossible, but tougher. Because if you can imagine, a 3-year-old at their worst is not as bad as a 5-year-old at their worst. And a 5-year-old at their worst is not as bad as a 10-year-old at their worst. The worst thing you can do for these behaviors is to give in to them. Meaning like, oh, they protested because they wanted something. Okay, I'm just going to give them what they want. It ultimately reinforces the behavior you're trying to get rid of. The thing that we train all of our staff to do, especially with self-injurious behaviors, like hitting themselves on the head, banging their head, doing these self-injurious type of behaviors, is to ignore them. Most of the time for self-injurious behaviors, they get worse and worse over time because of this attention that parents give to it. And that they know that, oh, if I resort to this, you will give me the attention that I'm looking for, or you will give me the item that I was looking for, or you will give in to whatever demands I have. It happens, the child hits themselves, the parents like, oh my God, they're gonna hurt themselves. They grab their hands, they hold their hands down like, no, it's not okay to hit yourself, and so they give them a lot of attention. They're also holding the child, so just a simple act of providing some physical interaction reinforces the very behaviors you're trying to get rid of. What you wanna do is like, I don't know how badly the child attempts to hurt themselves here, but you never want to address that behavior directly necessarily unless you're planning to punish it. Like, oh, if the child headbangs, like no headbanging, and then you apply whatever punishment, or no hitting yourself and you apply the punishment right away. The punishment just has to be meaningful enough to the child for them to stop engaging in that particular behavior. The more you try to block it, the more likely they're going to do it. Something you can do instead is make them do something else with their hands, So they're hitting their head, and you're like, clap. You grab their hands and you make them clap. I'm not directly addressing the hitting his head, but it always, the instruction and making them do something come immediately after, in which case I'm shifting that attention away from the head banging into an instruction I want them to follow that will keep their hands busy so that they're not hitting their head. I think in terms of how to handle this protest when they're engaging in all these behaviors, it's learning how to, one, not react to the situation, okay, and minimize the eye contact you give them. Don't talk to them about it. Don't address it. It's better to just plain old ignore that if you can, you know. If they're damaging themselves to the degree, then I would implement a punishment procedure, or I would go in and redirect the child to do something with their hands so that they're not engaging in that behavior. And then I would go in if they're not listening to me and facilitating it. There are very, very specific techniques that we teach our staff in terms of how to handle a child. And unfortunately, that is beyond the scope of this Q&A. So we will probably need to have a whole stream completely devoted to that, because it's about learning how to be effective without using force.